I told my mother-in-law that my house was her house, and she said, "Get the hell off my property." But there, everything has its drawbacks, as the man said when his mother-in-law died, and they came down upon him for the funeral expenses. Himanshu and I travel together whenever possible, but there are times when I like to travel with my mother and Masi. It is really shocking that trolls comment on that, too. They say, "Don't you get along with your mother-in-law that you don't take her along?" Now, who would accept such remarks about one's mother? My mother-in-law fell down a wishing well. I was amazed, I never knew they worked. My mother-in-law had a pain beneath her left breast, turned out to be a trick knee. I cut diamond in my crown, in my home in Georgia, because I wanted to use an old 1848 pump organ that my mother-in-law had gotten for Emery for Christmas one year. His mother would be proud to know that pump organ was made use of. Indianness, love for your country, is complicated. For every person, there is a different way that you show respect for your country. My mother-in-law will say karmayogi is the way to go, do your work. Even before marriage I used to cook delicious dishes for my wife and mother-in-law on Jamai Susti. A car is like a mother-in-law, if you let it, it will rule your life. The mother-in-law came round last week. It was absolutely pouring down. So I opened the door and I saw her there and I said, "Mother, don't just stand there in the rain. Go home." The best compliment that has ever been given to me was, I was at the airport one day and a guy came in and said, "Lionel, my wife loves you, the kids love you, my mother-in-law loves you, the family loves you." I am very close to my mother-in-law, Lee, we see each other often. I went to dinner with my mother-in-law and I just realized I was talking in sound bites to her and expecting her to laugh every time I said anything or be jotting something down in a notebook. So you have to kind of really have a talk with yourself after you've done a press tour and say, chill out. My mother-in-law thinks I'm more beautiful than all the other faces around. She keeps encouraging me to take up more work. It's funny, you know, my mother-in-law, who doesn't have an ounce of nerd in her, is just so excited by the fact that I write Batman, because she'll see an article about me in the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal or something, and that means so much to me. Behind every successful man stands a surprised mother-in-law. I do most of the cooking at home, and both my mom and my mother-in-law are excellent chefs. However, I wouldn't call myself a chef. Honestly, people can write anything they want about me and I could care less. But once you start writing stuff about my family, my wife and my daughter and son or my mother-in-law, then you're drawing a line. My mother-in-law has come round to our house at Christmas 7 years running. This year we're having a change, we're going to let her in. I know my mother-in-law would drive 2 hours to go see a movie that I'm in. My mother-in-law is so fat that when she passes her handbag from hand to hand she throws it. My mother-in-law Vicky is an amazing person and has been nothing but helpful and supportive. She helps with the little things, dealing with being on the road and being away from home and how to keep up communication and little things like where the best hotels are, how to find a gym, little things on the road. A mother-in-law is better than a single and childless political persona, though. I was extremely close to my mother-in-law and after she, and later my father-in-law passed away, I continue to feel their presence. When I hit the scene, there was Billy Connolly and Max Boyce. It was all mother-in-law and Irish jokes, and we broke the mold. Now there are thousands of comedians out there, and I don't think I can be above it all. I think, more than my husband, my mother-in-law gets excited and proud and whatnot whenever she sees me on screen. I'm often accused of saying some pretty rotten things about my mother-in-law, but quite honestly, she's only got one major fault, it's called breathing. The 4 rings on my wedding finger are all very significant, my wedding ring, my mom's wedding ring and the engagement rings of my granny and mother-in-law. In the case of maternal health care, you look at, well naturally, it's the mother who's the customer, who makes the decisions. But in truth, the mother in many areas, in certain parts of India, the mother has very little decision-making power at all. The real decision-maker is the mother-in-law. My mother-in-law, Nanny, spent her working years as a bookkeeper at a medical office in Columbus, Ohio. Like so many Americans, she worked hard and paid into Medicare, knowing that one day she could count on having high-quality health care when she needed it most. Personally, I wear a lot of my mother-in-law's chiffons and my mother's silk, but when I buy saris for myself, then they have to be understated. My mother-in-law was with me during all 4 of my births and when she was sitting next to me holding my hand during the cesareans, well, I craved that. My mother-in-law is an awesome cook, but I have grown up eating the food cooked by my mother. I must say that both of them have their own area of specialization when it comes to cooking. I took my mother-in-law to Madame Tussauds Chamber of Horrors, and one of the attendants said, "Keep her moving, sir, we're stock-taking." Both my mother-in-law and Rajiv made it easy for me. I feel very Indian and am not conscious of being an Italian in India. The mother-in-law had an accident at work. A hot rivet dropped down her drawers and she fell off the oil rig. Conscience is a mother-in-law whose visit never ends. My mother-in-law has so many wrinkles, when she smiles she looks like a Venetian blind. Until Ranveer was born in August 2005, 3 years into our marriage, I was working in Hindi or South Indian films. After marriage, I began learning how to run a house. My mother wanted to teach me the basics, but I was never home. So when my mother-in-law taught me chores, it was hard to adjust. I went from resenting my mother-in-law to accepting her, finally to appreciating her. What appeared to be her diffidence when I was first married, I now value as serenity. My mother-in-law speaks not a word of English. I speak not a word of Tajiki, so I smile at her ingratiatingly and she fixes me with a beady eye. My mother-in-law's from Norway, and she's always liked old-school remedies. I saw 6 men kicking and punching the mother-in-law. My neighbor said, "Are you going to help?" I said, "No, 6 should be enough." The final scenes in Rain are just like my mother-in-law when she would sit under the window in my sitting room, 1 foot in the other world and just holding on. Someday I will get married, and I should be able to watch my films with my children, mother-in-law, and father-in-law. I find it beautiful when we're in Italy that everybody sits down at the table together. My mother-in-law is like, it doesn't matter what's going on in the house, who is fighting, who is upset, who has appointments, you sit down at that table at 1 o'clock. I have no problem putting my feet up and watching football, but my mother-in-law is always doing stuff. I have a great relationship with my mother-in-law. We're both Laos, we understand each other. I think that what I do, in terms of how I craft my words rhetorically, is fairly simple stuff. I don't mean that to denigrate myself. I mean that in the sense of, when I write, the person that I keep in mind is my mother-in-law. When you have a wonderful mother-in-law who takes sides with you and squabbles with her own daughter, that's something. Visit our website for more quotes, quoting.com.